Every night a lion appeared at the edge of the cattle pen, not to hunt, not to roar. He just stood there, quiet, watching, like a soldier who never forgot his post. Locals called him a curse, a ghost in the tall grass. But the old man who owned the farm believed otherwise, that this lion remembered something the world had long forgotten: gratitude, memory, and a debt never repaid. Until one fateful night when a gunshot broke the silence, and everything changed. The morning sun had barely broken the horizon when Daniel M. Whale stepped outside his modest cattle hut on the edge of the savannah. A light breeze whispered through the dry acacia trees, brushing against the faded canvas of his porch awning. At 71, Daniel's body had slowed, but his senses, sharpened by decades as a former wildlife ranger, remained vigilant. He didn't need binoculars to know something was different that morning. The cows were silent, not fearful, not agitated, just quiet, too quiet. His boots sank softly into the dry earth as he walked the narrow path down to the cattle pen. The sky above was a burnished orange, the kind of light that made every shadow stretch longer than usual. And there, in the fine layer of dust that clung to the dry seasoned ground, Daniel saw them again. Footprints, large, deep, spaced with the grace of power. Not chaotic, not erratic. Each step marked a measured pace, like someone pacing the perimeter with a purpose. But these weren't human prints. They were the unmistakable tracks of a full-grown male lion. He crouched beside the freshest print, his knee cracking as he bent down. The dew from the night had settled in its center, revealing the fine ridges of a massive paw pad. 4 distinct toe marks fanned outward like petals on a dying flower, and at the center a faint groove, evidence of age, maybe injury. This wasn't the first morning Daniel had found them. It was the 11th. For 11 nights in a row, a lion had walked the edges of his small cattle farm, looping around the pen, but never breaching it. Not once. Not even when one of the calves had broken through a weak spot in the fence and wandered out into the open. That calf had been found the next morning, not far off, sleeping soundly under a baobab tree. No scratch, no blood, just dust on its back and an old bell still jangling faintly around its neck. Daniel rose slowly, brushing the dust from his palms, eyes scanning the far line of trees where the open grasslands dipped into a thicker brush. Nothing moved, yet he could feel something watching, or maybe remembering. Back at the house he poured himself a mug of bitter black coffee. Not the instant kind, real beans, roasted and crushed by hand. He took it without sugar. His hands, though scarred and calloused, still remembered how to steady a rifle, how to tie a wound, how to carry a lion cub out of a fire. But that was another life, another Daniel. The man who now sipped coffee from a chipped ceramic mug was no longer a ranger. Just a man with 17 cattle, 2 broken solar panels, and more memories than he knew what to do with. He didn't tell the neighbors, not yet. The villagers in the nearby settlement had a way of escalating things. Rumors grew like dry grass in the wind, and one whisper about a lion near livestock was enough to bring trappers, bounty hunters, or worse, men with no understanding of balance, only bullets. He had learned that truth, the hard way, once. Instead, he quietly reinforced the fence, adding extra wooden stakes at the weak spots, not to keep the lion out, oddly enough, but to keep the cows in. He wasn't afraid. He was curious, and maybe something deeper, unspoken. That night he sat on the porch with a flashlight, the beam turned off, letting the moon do the watching. He didn't expect to see anything. Lions were ghosts when they wanted to be. But the dogs didn't bark, the cows didn't stir, and somewhere, beyond the perimeter, something moved, just one rustle in the tall grass. Then silence. When morning came, the prints were back. He followed them this time. They formed a complete circle, starting from the southern edge of the fence, looping to the eastern side, pausing at the water trough, then back toward the rear grazing patch. Always the same route, always the same pace. He noticed something else, too. The prints had never once entered the pen. No claw marks, no signs of aggression, no scattered hoof prints from panicked cattle. Just calm. Daniel knew lions. He'd tracked rogue males across the Caggiato Plains in his younger years, darted them, relocated them, even buried one he couldn't save. They were unpredictable, wild, ferocious when cornered. But this was something else. This was patterned, measured, almost deliberate. And that was what unsettled him the most. It wasn't natural for a predator to avoid an easy meal, not unless it had a reason. Later that week, Daniel made a trip to the feed store, a 2-hour drive across dirt roads and cracked tarmac that had forgotten what maintenance meant. The young man behind the counter, face buried in a smartphone, barely looked up as Daniel entered. "Morning, Mr. Mulwale. Need more calf feed?" Daniel nodded. "And some fencing wire, the thick kind." The boy finally looked up, curiosity piqued. "Trouble with predators?" Daniel hesitated. "Just keeping the cows safe." The boy laughed. "Good luck. Lot of hyena activity lately. You hear about the farmer up in Elmuck, lost 4 goats in 2 nights? Daniel nodded, though inside he thought, hyenas wouldn't leave a calf untouched. Back home, he fixed the fence with slow, methodical care. His hands worked on instinct, but his mind wandered to old campsites in the Tsavo scrublands, to a cub with 1 injured paw, to a fire that had burned faster than they expected, to the smell of smoke and something else, something that felt like trust. That evening, his daughter Aisha called. "Papa, are you okay? Someone from the village texted me. Said you've got lions circling the farm?" Daniel swallowed. 1 lion, and he's not circling. He's watching. There was silence on the line. Then her voice, more clipped than before. "You're not thinking of letting it stay, are you?" "I'm not thinking anything yet." "You can't live out there alone, Papa. Not with a predator on your land. What if it turns?" Daniel's voice was quiet. He already had the chance. More silence. Then the call ended. That night, Daniel didn't sleep, not because he was afraid, but because his chest ached with something he hadn't felt in years. Recognition. At 2:36 a.m., the flashlight beside his bed blinked 3 times, motion sensor on the porch camera. Daniel got up, bare feet cold against the cement floor. He stepped outside slowly, not turning on any lights. He knew better. There, near the far end of the fence, bathed in moonlight, stood a lion. He was massive, larger than any Daniel had seen in decades. His mane was dark at the edges, almost black, and his body was riddled with the kind of scars that only came from survival, not dominance. He stood still, not eating, not prowling, just watching. Then, without a sound, he turned and disappeared into the grass. Daniel exhaled slowly, a whisper caught in the throat. He remembered something. A moment. A lion cub, no older than 3 months, lying beneath. A smoldering tree, ribs visible through cracked skin. A ranger dropping his rifle and lifting the cub into a burlap sack, whispering something into its ear without realizing it. And for the first time in 12 years, Daniel Mulwale said that name aloud into the quiet wind of the savannah. "Oh, Kazi?" He didn't sleep again that night, not because of fear, because something had returned, something wild, and it had remembered him. The next morning, the sun rose hot and early, casting long spears of light across the open grasslands. Daniel stood at the fence line again, his boots in the same dusty footprints, only this time he wasn't alone. A boy named Thomas, no more than 10, had spotted him from the road and now hovered nearby, kicking small rocks with 1 bare foot. "Is it true?" the boy asked without preamble. "They said there's a lion, a big one. My uncle said it'll eat your cows next." Daniel didn't answer at first. He just looked down at the earth, where the lion's latest tracks curled almost protectively around the pen. "Your uncle," Daniel finally said, "has never seen a lion do anything but roar from a safe truck." Thomas grinned nervously, unsure whether it was a joke or a scold. "Mama said I shouldn't come near. She said bad things follow lions." Daniel turned then, squinting into the light, his lined face unreadable. "Tell your mama," he said gently, "that bad things don't follow lions. They follow people who don't understand them." The boy hesitated, then nodded, and ran off the way he'd come, dust rising behind his heels. By midday, the rumors had bloomed like a veldt fire in dry season. The village of Kiepold, 5 kilometers away, buzzed with speculation. At the roadside market, voices clashed over crates of mangoes and beans. "He's keeping it," one woman insisted. "I heard he raised it when he was younger. Witchcraft. That's why it hasn't attacked." "Nonsense!" scoffed an older man in a sun-faded army jacket. "He's just too stubborn to do what needs to be done. Once that lion kills, he'll cry to us for help." "Kill it before it kills," another chimed in. And like that, the energy shifted, from curiosity to fear, from fear to aggression. It always happened fast when people didn't feel in control. That afternoon, a white pickup truck rolled down the gravel road toward Daniel's home. Dust trailed behind it like a warning. Behind the wheel was Elias Kaur, a man in his early 40s with eyes too cold for his age. He wore a crisp tan shirt and dark glasses that seemed too clean for this part of the world. His truck bore the painted logo of the Regional Livestock Protection Fund, a private group supposedly focused on predator deterrence. Daniel stood outside, arms folded, as Elias stepped down from the truck. "Mr. Muelle," Elias said with a politician's smile, "I heard about your situation." "I don't recall inviting you," Daniel said flatly. Elias laughed as if it were a joke, wiping dust from his sleeve. "No invitation needed when there's livestock at risk. Look, I get it. You've always had a soft spot for wildlife, but a lion around cattle? That's bad for everyone. Bad for business, bad for security. One scare and milk production drops. You know that." Daniel said nothing. "I can send a crew out," Elias continued, tapping a pen against his clipboard. "Set a few traps. Quiet, efficient, no blood on your hands." "No blood at all," Daniel said. "Then we'll just remove it. Relocate if possible. If not—" Elias shrugged, letting the silence fill in the blanks. Daniel narrowed his eyes. "If I see a trap on my land, I'll treat it like a threat." Elias's smile faltered. "I hope you understand what you're implying." "I do." The silence that followed wasn't long, but it was enough. Elias nodded, too politely, then returned to his truck. After he drove away, Daniel stood for a long time, listening to the sound of the cicadas rising in waves. He wasn't afraid of men like Elias. He was afraid of what men like Elias could turn a lion into, with one wrong story, one well-timed lie. That evening the wind shifted. It was just past 8 when a second truck rolled up. But this one, older and coated in the red clay of long roads, was familiar. Asha stepped out before the engine had even stopped. She looked older than the last time he'd seen her, 4 years ago, during the funeral of her mother. Her hair was tied back tight, face serious, and she wore the green field vest of a local wildlife nonprofit. The family resemblance was sharp, but it was the fire in her eyes that proved whose daughter she was. "You should have called me," she said, walking past him without a hug. "I didn't know I needed to," Daniel replied. "You're living with a lion outside your house, and you didn't think that was something your daughter should know?" Daniel sighed. "It's not living with anything. He comes. He goes." And what happens when he doesn't go? Asha demanded, spinning on him. What happens when the wrong person sees him? There are children here, families. You're not the only one who could get hurt. Daniel looked at her, his jaw tightening. He hasn't heard anything. He hasn't even looked at those cows. Wrong. She stared at him, frustration and concern battling behind her eyes. You named him, didn't you? Daniel blinked. You always do. Every injured thing you found as a ranger, you gave it a name. Like that would make it safe. There was a beat of silence. Daniel's voice was softer now. Kazi? The name seemed to take something from the air. Asha turned away, her voice low. Is it really him? I don't know, Daniel admitted, but he remembers. I can feel it. That night, they watched the camera footage together. The lion returned at 2:14 a.m., exactly as he had the night before. Same pattern, same paws near the trough, same long gaze toward the porch. Asha leaned forward. He's not watching the cows. I know, Daniel said. She turned to him slowly. He's watching you. The next morning, things took a darker turn. One of the calves, only 4 months old, was missing. The gate was open just wide enough for something, small to slip through. No signs of struggle, no blood, just one small, half-finished trail that led off into the tall grass. And stopped. Asha scanned the ground with a practiced eye. No drag marks, nothing heavy moved. Whatever happened, it was clean. Daniel stood silent, staring at the tree line. Then Asha spotted something behind the water trough, a small bell, the one that had hung from the calf's neck. It was bent, like it had been ripped off. Asha held it up. Lions don't take collars or hide kills, not like this. Daniel's brow furrowed. Then someone wants us to think it was him. That afternoon, Elias returned. This time he didn't get out of the truck. He just sat there, engine idling, sunglasses reflecting the midday sun. After a few minutes, he drove away again, no words exchanged. But Daniel knew what that look meant. The village now had its proof. A calf was gone. The lion had been seen. And the weight of fear was quickly becoming too heavy for truth to carry alone. That evening, Daniel sat on the porch with Asha beside him. For a long time, neither spoke. The sky turned from gold to bruised purple, the stars beginning their slow dance above. You can't protect him forever, Asha said softly. I'm not trying to protect him, Daniel whispered. I'm trying to understand why he's protecting us. And deep in the tall grass, beyond the reach of fences or politics, a lion stood alone, watching the house where an old man sat with his daughter, just as he had done night after night, in a silence full of memory. It took 3 nights to rig the camera, not because it was complicated equipment. Daniel had used far more advanced surveillance tech back in his ranger days, but because he needed the placement to be perfect, hidden well enough not to spook the lion, close enough to capture every movement in high resolution. He mounted it in the old baobab tree near the back fence, where the tracks curved widest. That was always where the lion paused, always where the dust held his weight just a little deeper. Asha stayed behind the camera setup, arms crossed, skeptical. Even if we catch him on video, what will it change? Daniel didn't look up from the lens calibration. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. People don't want footage, they want blame. A body, if possible. Daniel finished tightening the final bolt and climbed down carefully. They'll have to settle for the truth. That night they didn't sleep. Daniel sat in the kitchen, laptop open, feed streaming from the motion sensor cam. Asha hovered near the window, arms wrapped around herself. The house creaked with the cool night air, but the world outside was unnaturally still. Even the cattle didn't stir. Then, at 2:11 a.m., the sensor blinked. The camera switched to infrared. And there he was. A shape emerged from the savanna, moving with impossible quiet for something so large. Massive shoulders, a flowing black-edged mane, and eyes that seemed to glow with something older than instinct. The lion stepped into view slowly, one footfall at a time, never hesitating. He passed the first fence line, not crossing it, but grazing it with the tip of his tail. His head turned, not toward the cows, but toward the house. "He's looking for you," Asha whispered. On screen, the lion stopped at the base of the baobab. His body turned sideways, revealing a long scar along his ribs. His ears twitched. Then, suddenly, his head lifted. A low, short rumble escaped his chest. Not quite a roar, more like acknowledgement, recognition. He didn't approach the pen. He didn't test the fence. Instead, he sat, just sat, facing the direction of the dark brush beyond the farm, as if guarding it. Minutes passed. A pair of glowing dots appeared at the edge of the camera frame, eyes reflecting the infrared. Hyenas, 2 at first, then 3. They moved low to the ground, sniffing the air, tails twitching. The lion didn't move. One of the hyenas advanced too close. The lion stood, slow and deliberate. He took 2 steps forward. No sound, no aggression. The hyenas froze. Then, as if someone had flipped a switch, they scattered into the brush, tails tucked. Daniel exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for hours. "He didn't even chase them," Asha said. "Just stood there." "He didn't need to," Daniel murmured. The lion waited another few minutes. Then he turned, circled the pen once, and vanished into the grass. Back in the kitchen, Asha rewound the footage. She zoomed in on the lion's flank where the scar was visible. Then she paused, sharpened the image. "Is that—" she started. Daniel nodded. "Yes?" Asha stared at him, voice caught between disbelief and awe. The scar? The one from the fire. 12 years ago, when Daniel still wore a ranger badge, a wildfire had ripped through the edge of Tsavo. Lightning, dry winds, a perfect storm. In the chaos, they'd found a lioness dead in the grass, smoke still rising from her body. Beside her, a cub, small and raw-eyed, paws burned. Daniel had picked it up without thinking. No gloves, no protocol, just instinct. And when the cub trembled against his chest, he whispered a name. "Kazi," Asha said aloud. "It's him." They sat in silence for a long time. By morning, word had already spread. Someone in the village claimed to have seen a hyena carcass near the main road. Others swore they heard roaring, even though the camera had captured none. Stories twisted quickly. The calf's disappearance still lingered like smoke. Elias returned in the afternoon. This time, he didn't smile. "We've received authorization to set traps within a 2-kilometer radius," he said, "including your land." "You don't have that right," Asha snapped. "Your father's fence isn't registered," Elias replied smoothly. "No official boundary, and the calf loss means your livestock is classified as vulnerable under regional code." Daniel stepped forward. "He hasn't harmed a single animal." "You lost a calf," Elias shot back. "No evidence he took it." "There's no evidence he didn't." Daniel's voice was low. "I've got footage, full coverage." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Then submit it. Publicly." He left without another word. That evening, Daniel sat on the porch again. The laptop rested on his lap, camera footage loaded. The lion's image filled the screen, but something gnawed at him, not just the scar, the movement, the pause near the trough, the way he sat exactly in the same spot night after night, facing the same direction. "He's watching for something," Daniel said. "Like what?" Asha asked. "I don't know, but it's not us, and it's not the cows." That night, the lion came again. This time, the camera picked up something different. Movement in the distant brush, too smooth for animals. Shapes. 2 men crawling low, one with a rifle, the other carrying what looked like a sack. Poachers? Cattle thieves? The lion turned before the camera could fully confirm. He moved, fast, silent, and within seconds the figures had vanished. No gunshots, no screams, just nothing. But the camera caught it. Daniel watched the footage frame by frame, heart thudding. "He's not just guarding the cows," he said. "He's keeping people away." "Why?" Asha asked. Daniel stared at the screen. He remembers this place. And us? He remembers what happened here, what it meant to him. He closed the laptop slowly, resting a weathered hand on the lid. "And maybe," he added, almost to himself, "he knows what's coming." Later that week, the footage went viral. Asha uploaded it discreetly without names or location, just the lion standing guard, chasing off intruders. The title, "The Lion Who Watches." Within days, conservation blogs picked it up. A wildlife podcast discussed it. Emails poured in asking about behavior analysis, security cameras for farms, and wildlife deterrence. One even asked to sponsor the footage for an upcoming segment on animal cognition, highlighting how AI-driven surveillance technology was being used in rural Africa to detect predator patterns without harming them. Asha read that email aloud. "They want to advertise motion-triggered security systems in the name of a lion." Daniel smiled faintly. "Tell them it's already guarded." As the sun sank low over the plains once more, Daniel sat quietly, laptop by his side, eyes on the far grass. The lion hadn't come yet, but the wind was changing, and deep inside, Daniel knew something was shifting, not just in the land, but in the story that was unfolding. A story of memory, of protection, and of a lion who didn't forget the man who once saved him. 2 days after the video spread online, a vehicle pulled into Daniel's driveway just after noon. Dust trailed behind it like smoke from a long-burning fire, and when it stopped, the door didn't open right away. The truck was old, government-issued from another era, with faded paint and a Kenya Wildlife Service seal barely visible beneath layers of sun and dirt. Asha stepped outside with a guarded look, already suspicious. The door finally creaked open, and from the driver's side stepped a woman with sun-darkened skin, tightly braided hair, and a small notebook tucked under one arm. "Dr. Ayanda Zulu," she said before either of them could speak. "I'm here about the lion." Daniel emerged from the side of the house, wiping his hands with a cloth. He stopped cold when he saw her, something old flickering behind his eyes. "Ayanda?" he said slowly. She nodded, squinting in the afternoon light. "Still alive, I see." He didn't answer right away. Neither did she. Asha watched them both, sensing history hanging between them like storm clouds. "You two know each other?" she asked. Ayanda looked at her. "He left that part out?" Daniel motioned toward the porch. "Come inside. It's hot out." They sat in silence at the table, mugs of chai steaming between them. Ayanda flipped open her notebook and took out a still image from the footage, one printed frame of the lion near the fence. She placed it on the table and tapped it with her finger. "Where did you take this?" Daniel pointed toward the baobab. "Cameras mounted there, east perimeter." Ayanda leaned forward and traced the outline of the lion's body with her pen. "This is not just any lion. This is a dominant male, likely 7 or 8 years old. Judging by the scar here," she tapped his ribcage, "he survived at least one territorial battle, maybe more." She paused, tapping again, slower this time. "But this scar? This one's not from a fight." Daniel said nothing. "It's from heat. Burn trauma, maybe. Long healed, but the skin pattern is irregular. That doesn't happen in fights. That happens in wildfires." The room felt tighter. Asha frowned. "How would you know that?" Ayanda looked at her, her voice quiet but sure. "Because I documented it. Years ago. A cub pulled from the edge of a brush fire near Tsavo East. The mother was already dead. Poachers, most likely. And the cub was half burned. Not enough to kill him, but enough to mark him forever." She turned to Daniel. "You brought him in. You weren't supposed to. You didn't tell the service. You kept him." Daniel stared at the cup in his hands. "I had no choice." "You always had a choice. You just didn't care about the consequences." "I cared about him," Daniel said, finally looking up. "He would have died in the system. You know that." Ayanda nodded once, but her face stayed hard. "You disappeared after that. I filed a report. They shut it down. I thought maybe you let him go. Or worse." Daniel's voice dropped. "I did let him go. When he was ready, before he got too big." "Too big?" Asha repeated. "You raised a lion cub?" Silence. "He followed me everywhere," Daniel said, eyes distant. "Used to sleep under the old table. He wouldn't eat unless I did first. I taught him to wait, to be still, to watch." Asha blinked, stunned. "That's why he's doing it now." Ayanda nodded slowly. "He learned from you." They sat in stunned silence, the wind rustling the dry leaves beyond the house. Ayanda spoke again, softer now. "Do you still have the footage?" Daniel got up and returned with the laptop. Together, they watched the sequence again, the lion appearing from the edge of the grasslands, circling once, pausing by the trough, sitting in the same place, facing the same direction. Every movement precise, intentional. "He's not just following instinct," Ayanda murmured. "This is behavior rooted in memory." Asha folded her arms. "What does that mean for us?" "It means he's not dangerous, but it also means he won't stop coming." Later that afternoon, the three of them stood at the fence line, examining the perimeter. Ayanda crouched, pointing to a different set of tracks. "Human boots, 2 sets, deep heel prints, recent, within the last day." Daniel looked out toward the tree line. "The same men?" "Probably. But they weren't walking toward the cows. They were moving around the east trail. Same route the lion patrols every night." "Maybe they're testing him," Asha said quietly. "Or testing you," Ayanda added. "That night they reinforced the gate, not to keep anything out, but to funnel whatever came into the camera's view." They waited. At 2:09 a.m., the motion alert blinked. The lion appeared, earlier than usual. He paused halfway to the pen, head lowered. His tail twitched once, then twice. Ayanda leaned in. "He smells something." Seconds later, 2 shapes crept into frame. Men again, one with a machete, the other with a sack. They moved slowly, cautiously, trying not to make sound. But the lion was already moving. He exploded forward with terrifying speed, a blur of muscle and sound. The men scattered. One dropped the sack, its contents spilled out. Tools, rope, a slingshot, not weapons for defense, tools for capture. The lion didn't chase them far, just enough to make sure they wouldn't return. Then he circled back, as always, and sat. Asha whispered, "He's not protecting the cows. He's protecting the farm." Daniel nodded. He remembers who this place belonged to. Ayanda hit pause on the footage. The lion's eyes stared straight into the camera. "We can't keep him safe," she said. "Not if they know where he is." "Then we don't let them know," Daniel said. Asha frowned. "What if he's already on their list?" "He's already made his choice," Daniel replied. "He came back, not to hide, to stand guard." Later that morning, Ayanda pulled Daniel aside. "You know this won't last. If he stays too close to people, He becomes a threat, even if he doesn't act like one. I know, he said. You'll have to let him go again. Daniel looked out at the tall grass. I never asked him to stay. She touched his shoulder. But he did? They watched the sun rise over the savannah. Somewhere out there, the lion walked alone again, leaving behind only paw prints and the echo of a memory. And Daniel, for the first time in years, felt both pride and dread. It started with a question from Asha that Daniel wasn't ready for. They were sitting by the water trough, late afternoon sun flickering through the haze of dust and wind. The cattle were quiet, huddled in the shade, tails twitching lazily. Daniel had just replaced a damaged gate hinge, and his hands were still stained with rust when Asha finally asked, "Why did you stop being a ranger?" Daniel didn't look at her right away. He wiped his palms slowly on an old rag, eyes fixed on the distant acacia trees. The kind of silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was old, heavy, familiar. She tried again, softer this time. I mean, you always said you loved it. You gave your life to that job, but then you just left. You never told me why. Daniel sat down on the wooden rail beside her and stared at the ground for a long moment. It wasn't just Kazi, he said finally. Asha turned to him, surprised. What do you mean? I didn't just raise him. Didn't just break protocol. I broke trust with people I worked with the job, with myself. 12 years earlier, the wildfire had moved faster than anyone anticipated. A convergence of wind, dry brush, and a delayed response team had turned a routine burn into a catastrophe. Daniel had been the first one on the scene, alone, with nothing but a fire blanket and a half-empty water canister. He found the lioness already dead, her body partially scorched. The cub, barely breathing, curled beside her, one paw badly burned, his ribs protruding like a cage of brittle sticks. Daniel didn't hesitate. He wrapped the cub in his jacket and carried him out, navigating through smoke and flame, not thinking about rules or regulations. When he brought Kazi to the ranger camp, Ayanda had been furious. "You can't keep him," she had said. "This isn't what we do." Daniel didn't argue. He just built a small enclosure behind the camp and fed the cub milk mixed with crushed protein pellets, using a syringe at first. Kazi would cry at night, low, pitiful sounds that pulled at something in Daniel's chest he hadn't felt in years. He hadn't realized how much he needed the cub until he saw himself in its fight to live. And then there was the patrol. 2 months after taking in Kazi, Daniel was assigned to lead a small team monitoring poaching routes. The mission was routine: follow GPS coordinates, check trap sites, log movement. But it went wrong. A poacher's blind was missed. Shots were fired. One of Daniel's junior officers, Musa, was injured. Badly. A ricochet. Lucky not to die. And because Daniel had left camp unauthorized the night before to bring Kazi medication, he hadn't been rested. He hadn't been sharp. And in the official report, the details were vague, but the implication clear. Dereliction of duty, they called it. Ayanda tried to shield him. She pushed for leniency, but he didn't fight it. He walked away before they could force him out. They told me I could stay if I gave Kazi up, Daniel said quietly. But by then, it was too late. He was more than just an animal. Asha said nothing for a long time. Then finally, she whispered, "You lost everything." Daniel nodded. "Except him." When Kazi was nearly a year old, Daniel knew it was time. He'd grown too large, too curious, too wild to stay near humans. So Daniel drove him far, beyond the boundaries of the reserve, into the borderlands near Tsavo. It was dangerous, but it was freedom. He remembered kneeling in the tall grass, looking into those golden eyes one last time, and saying the only word he could, "Go." Kazi hadn't run. He had walked, slowly, like he understood. And now, 12 years later, the lion had returned, not with vengeance, not with fear, but with memory. "He came back," Daniel said, staring at the horizon. "And I still don't know what that says about him, or about me." The next morning, Ayanda received a message from one of her contacts in wildlife enforcement. 3 lions had been spotted farther south, 1 dominant male, 2 juveniles, likely his offspring. Satellite tracking showed their movements had circled Daniel's property more than once. But what was alarming was not the lion, it was the pattern. "They're being pushed," Ayanda said. "Poachers. Development. Shrinking land. That's why he came back here. It's the last place he knows that felt safe." Daniel frowned. "And now he's brought his family?" "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe they're following him, but it means the risk just doubled." Asha looked at her father. "If people find out there are more lions—" "They won't," Daniel said. "Not from us." But by dusk, another complication had already arrived. A police vehicle parked at the end of the drive. A uniformed officer stepped out, along with a man in civilian clothes carrying a KEC clipboard. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. "Is this about the calf?" Daniel asked before they could speak. "No," the officer replied. "This is about surveillance footage that went viral last week." Asha's stomach dropped. "The Wildlife Protection Board received complaints," the man with the clipboard said. "Allegations of harboring a wild predator without proper containment. That, under Article 7C, classifies this farm as an unlicensed wildlife interaction site." Daniel's jaw clenched. "He's wild. He comes and goes. We don't feed him. We don't touch him. We observe." "Observation," the man said flatly, "requires a permit." "And you waited until now?" Ayanda cut in. "Convenient after the footage embarrassed your department." The man didn't blink. "We're here to protect the public. Lions are apex predators. This behavior is unnatural." "No," Daniel said. "It's just inconvenient." They gave him 72 hours to file for emergency exemption. After that, they would act. That night, Daniel didn't watch the camera. He sat by the gate, staring out into the dark, whispering Kazi's name under his breath. Asha came to him near midnight. "You don't have to fight this alone." Daniel looked up, his eyes tired. "But he's alone out there, and that's my fault." She knelt beside him. "You didn't abandon him. You gave him a chance. That's more than most get." Daniel didn't answer, but far out in the tall grass something moved, a shape, broad-shouldered, silent, and behind him 2 smaller shapes, watching, waiting. The family he never knew had begun to take root in the only place that had ever welcomed him, the farm, the man, the memory. And now the fight to protect all 3 had only just begun. The wind changed that evening. It came in hot from the west, heavy with dust and the faint metallic scent of heat rising off the plains. Daniel noticed it first while mending a cracked water line. It wasn't the kind of breeze that cooled. It carried weight, pressure, like something pressing against the land. Cattle shifted uneasily under the acacia trees, tails swatting harder, nostrils flaring toward the horizon. Asha was on the porch, flipping through Ayanda's notes when she looked up. "They feel it too," she said. Daniel nodded without speaking. He moved slowly across the yard, double-checking the gate latches, his boots scraping against dry earth. There was no real reason for his restlessness, nothing visible, nothing concrete. But every animal on that farm was suddenly on edge. Even the birds in the thorn brush had gone quiet. Ayanda returned just before dark. She had driven 2 hours to meet with a friend in wildlife intelligence, hoping to buy time, maybe even secure a temporary stay against the enforcement threat. But her face, as she stepped out of the vehicle, told Daniel everything before she spoke. "They've denied the exemption," she said. Daniel leaned against the fence. How long? 48 hours. After that, they can bring in tranquilizers. Relocate him, or worse. Is it official? Signed this morning. Asha stood in the doorway, arms folded tight. They're not going to wait 2 days. Ayanda nodded grimly. No, they won't. At 1:08 a.m., the power went out. Not the usual flicker of a transformer or the quiet fade of solar failure. This was abrupt, total. The cameras shut down. The porch light died. Even the wind seemed to stop for a moment, like the world had been unplugged. Daniel was already moving. He grabbed the flashlight from behind the door and checked the inverter. The solar rig had been manually switched off, wires pulled loose, not chewed. Cut. Asha, get inside, he said. Now. But she was already at the back of the house, looking out through the curtain. Movement, she whispered. 3 men. East side. Ayanda pulled out her phone, but the signal was dead. Blocked or jammed, Daniel couldn't tell. He reached for the old radio in the pantry, flipping the switch. Nothing but static. A sound cracked from the far side of the field, metal hitting metal. One of the gates. The cattle startled but didn't bolt, their instincts confused by the unnatural quiet. Then came a second sound, lower, closer. A growl, not from fear, from ownership. Kazi's silhouette broke from the grass line with terrifying silence. 1 second, the field was empty. The next, he was there, his shoulders rolling like tides, his steps slow and deliberate. He didn't charge. He didn't roar. He walked between the men and the cattle and stopped. A single motion, a challenge, a warning. One of the men raised something. Daniel couldn't see what, but Kazi growled, and it was enough. The sound tore through the dark like a wave of pressure, low and ancient. The man dropped whatever he held and fell back, tripping over the tall grass. The others froze. Then a gunshot, not at the lion, into the air, meant to scare, maybe to signal. It didn't matter. Kazi stepped forward. Another growl. The men turned and ran. They vanished into the brush, boots crashing through the dry scrub. One dropped a pack in the chaos. Ayanda retrieved it minutes later, ropes, a stun baton, and a printed map of the farm layout. They weren't poachers, she said, her voice tight. They came for him. They knew exactly where to go. Daniel sat on the porch steps, arms resting on his knees. Then we were right, he said. They were testing him before. Now they came to take him. Asha looked out toward the field. Kazi was gone again, not a trace. Ayanda opened the pack further. At the bottom, she found a file folder with the wildlife service emblem. Inside was a printed document. Application for removal of threat-level predatory animal. Attached was a photo. It was Kazi, from the camera footage. Zoomed in, printed, labeled with the date. Daniel's name was written in the reporting party field. He stared at it in disbelief. I never filed this. They used the footage, Ayanda said. They clipped your video, took the timestamp, faked the report. You're listed as requesting removal. Asha's voice was cold. They want him dead. Daniel stood up slowly, anger radiating off him in waves. Then they'll have to come back, he said. In the daylight, through the front. Ayanda didn't try to talk him down. By morning, word had spread. Again. But this time it wasn't about the lion. It was about Daniel. Armed confrontation at the whale farm. Illegal predator harboring escalates. Former ranger refuses wildlife control entry. Daniel's phone lit up, with messages he didn't bother reading. But one voicemail stood out, sent from an unknown number. It played with crackling audio. You've made this complicated. We gave you chances. If that lion's not gone by tomorrow, neither are you. No name, no emotion. Just a promise. Daniel deleted it without comment. That afternoon, he replaced every broken camera, reinforced every gate, and tied metal wind chimes to the perimeter, an old trick from back when he guarded elephant corridors, not to keep predators away, to signal men. At sunset, Kazi returned. This time he didn't patrol. He stood by the trough and stared at the house. Then he did something he'd never done before. He laid down, right there, in the open, exposed, vulnerable, watching, waiting. Asha whispered, "He knows they'll come again." Daniel nodded. "So do we." Ayanda didn't speak. The silence settled over them like a second night, and out beyond the edge of the light, the land held its breath, waiting to see what would come when men tried to finish what nature had already forgiven. The day was too still, the kind of stillness Daniel had always feared most, the unnatural hush that came before a storm, or worse, before blood. Even the cattle didn't chew. They stood beneath the wide acacia trees with their heads low, shifting from foot to foot like something had unsettled the earth beneath them. The air smelled of heat, of waiting, of something about to break. Asha sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by documents, permit papers, legal notices, printed emails from journalists and wildlife organizations. She had stayed up the night before drafting letters, appeals, press statements, anything to slow the hand moving against them. But nothing stuck. It was like trying to shout into a sandstorm. The system wasn't listening. It had already made up its mind. Ayanda paced outside, near the trough. She checked the ground every few minutes, then looked up toward the brush beyond the fence line. The lion hadn't returned since the night of the raid. No paw prints, no sound, no sign. "He's not coming back," she said finally. Daniel leaned on the fence post. "He will. It's been 2 nights. If he's smart, he's staying away." Daniel didn't answer. He stared at the horizon like it owed him something. Later that afternoon, Ayanda's phone buzzed with a private number. She stepped away to answer and came back with her face pale beneath the sun. "A lion was found this morning," she said. Daniel froze. "A few miles south, injured, deep gash in his side, ripped flank, still alive, but weak. He was seen dragging himself through brushland." Asha stood. "Is it him?" "I don't know. Could be another. Could be him. But if it is, he's not hunting. He's just trying to breathe." Daniel moved quickly. He packed water, a first aid kit, and an old field bag he hadn't touched in years. Asha tried to stop him, but there was no use. He was already heading toward the truck. "He saved us," he said. "We don't let him die alone." They drove south for over an hour, bumping over broken trails that hadn't seen a ranger vehicle in months. Ayanda followed with her own truck. The coordinates came from a goat herder who had reported the lion after nearly stumbling onto him in the tall grass. It didn't take long to find the signs: disturbed brush, a trail of flattened reeds, a dark smear across a low ridge. Blood. Daniel stepped out and followed the trail on foot, slower now, his boots soft against the dry ground. Then he saw him. Kazi was lying under a tree, ribs rising and falling in labored rhythm. His left side was torn, the fur matted with blood and dirt. Flies circled lazily. His eyes were half closed. Daniel didn't speak. He knelt slowly, carefully, and just sat there. After a moment, the lion's eyes shifted. Recognition, not fear, not surprise. Just trust. Asha arrived next. She knelt on the other side, placing the water dish near his muzzle. He didn't drink, but his tongue flicked once, acknowledging the gesture. Ayanda joined with gauze and antiseptic, but even she paused before stepping closer. This was no longer science. This was something older, something sacred. "We can clean the wound," she said softly. "We can slow the bleeding. But he needs rest, real rest." Daniel looked up. "He won't stay here, not like this. He'll try to go back." "Why?" Asha asked. "He thinks it's his job, to protect the farm, the cattle, Us. Ayanda shook her head. That wound, he got it fighting something, someone. Maybe those men came back, maybe another lion. Whatever it was, he didn't back down. Daniel reached out, brushing a hand gently over Kazi's side. The lion didn't flinch. "You're not alone," he said. They worked quickly, flushing the wound with clean water, pressing gauze, wrapping what they could. Ayanda administered a sedative, just enough to ease the pain, not enough to knock him out. Completely. Kazi's breathing slowed. His eyes drifted shut. Asha whispered, "He looks tired." Daniel stayed there for hours, long after Ayanda and Asha returned to the vehicles, long after the sun dropped behind the hills. He sat with the lion, the silence between them full of everything neither could say. By morning, Kazi was gone. The makeshift bandage lay discarded in the grass. The trail was faint, but it moved north. Toward home. When they returned to the farm, Daniel found new prints near the pen. But these weren't Kazi's. They were smaller, lighter, 2 juveniles. Ayanda confirmed it. Cubs, maybe 8 months old. Likely Kazi's. "He brought them here," she said. "This place." He marked it. Asha stood near the back gate, watching the tall grass sway in the morning wind. Why here? Why now? "Because this is where he learned safety," Ayanda said. "This is the only place he knows where humans didn't run from him." Daniel didn't speak. He was already walking back to the baobab tree, where the first camera had once caught the lion's gaze. He reached up and tied a new piece of cloth to the branch, a strip from the old ranger uniform he hadn't worn in over a decade. A gesture, a flag, a promise. That night Kazi returned, not strong, not fast, but present. He limped through the field, his steps unsteady, his head low. But he came. The cattle didn't scatter, the wind didn't shift. He lay down once again near the trough beneath the stars and closed his eyes. Not to sleep, but to listen, to remember, to hold the line. Daniel sat beside him, silent. The king had bled, but he hadn't bowed. And somewhere beyond the quiet, the earth waited for morning to see if a lion's memory could hold back the weight of a world that had forgotten how to be still. Dawn came slowly, like a secret unfolding over the savannah. The first rays of sunlight stretched across the dry ground, slipping between the low clouds and painting the dust gold. Daniel was already awake. He hadn't slept. Neither had Kazi. The lion had stayed curled near the water trough all night, his breathing shallow but steady, his head rising now and then to scan the horizon. Daniel sat a few feet away, wrapped in his old field jacket, hands resting on his knees. Not once had the lion growled, not once had he moved toward the cattle. He simply existed there, like a statue left behind by time. Asha joined him before sunrise, a thermos of coffee in one hand. She handed it over without a word. Daniel nodded and took a slow sip, letting the heat fill the quiet. Then she said, "You knew all along, didn't you?" He didn't answer. "You knew it wasn't just memory or gratitude. He's been guarding us from something." Daniel looked out across the field. The cattle were waking now, moving in slow, deliberate groups. The juveniles, Kazi's cubs, stood farther off near the eastern fence, watching their father, learning. "I knew something," Daniel said, "but not everything." It was Ayanda who gave them the missing piece. She returned just after noon, carrying a manila folder and a tired look. The Wildlife Board had backed down temporarily, after a petition, after the footage, after pressure from online communities. The lion had gone viral. He was now known across the conservation world as the Sentinel. The story had made it into wildlife newsletters, tech blogs, even a health and wellness podcast discussing emotional resilience in the animal kingdom. but the folder in Ayanda's hand wasn't about to press. She placed it on the table between them. Daniel opened it. Photos. Grainy surveillance stills from a poaching drone. Maps of movement patterns. GPS coordinates. In every one of them, a lion figure, alone, patrolling the outer ring of the local farms. "Why do these matter?" Asha asked. Ayanda pointed to the timestamp. 2 weeks before the first calf went missing, poachers were using drones to identify farms with high-value livestock, not for theft, for biological testing. Hybrid feed trials, unsanctioned, illegal. They were injecting small numbers of animals with compounds to accelerate growth. Black market agri-research. Asha stared. "You're saying the calf didn't just disappear?" Ayanda nodded. "It was taken. The lion chased them off, but the people behind this are still out there. And they don't just want the lion gone, they want this story buried." Daniel leaned back in his chair, hand resting on the table. "So all this time," he said slowly, "he wasn't just remembering, he was defending." Ayanda met his eyes. "He knew before we did." The realization settled over them, thick and sharp. They walked outside together, standing on the porch as a breeze rose across the grass. The cubs played in the distance, still unsure of their place in the world. The cattle grazed quietly. The wind turbines in the distance clicked softly. Kazi was still near the trough, his head now resting on his paws, one eye half open. He looked older than he had even days ago, worn down. "Is he dying?" Asha asked. Ayanda nodded reluctantly. "He's fading. Wounds like that don't heal fast, not without intervention, and he wouldn't let us help now. He came back for this." They stood there a long time, watching him. That night Daniel walked into the field alone. He sat beside Kazi one last time. He spoke not loudly, but clearly. "You did more than I ever asked of you, more than I deserved. I couldn't protect you then. You protected us now. If this is your last night here, I'll keep watch." Kazi didn't move, but his breathing slowed. His body eased. In the early hours, before the stars began to fade, Kazi rose. Not strong, not steady, but proud. He walked toward the edge of the field, one step at a time. Daniel didn't follow. At the tree line, Kazi turned once, looking back, not at the house, but at the farm, the land, the people he had guarded. Then he disappeared into the brush. He didn't return. A week passed, then 2. Ayanda brought more updates. Investigations were underway. The illegal testing had been exposed. Several arrests had been made. The story had traveled farther than any of them expected. Online articles now referred to Daniel's land as a case study in human-wildlife coexistence. Tech sites highlighted the solar-powered cameras used to capture the lion's nightly watch. And in an unexpected twist, a major energy company reached out about installing updated motion sensor systems, citing the need for sustainable security solutions on rural properties. Asha laughed when she read the email. "They want to pay for cameras," she said, "because a lion used them better than they did." Daniel just smiled. One morning, a small box arrived. Inside was a wooden plaque, engraved with a single line. "He watched so we could sleep." No name, no organization, just the truth. They mounted it on the old baobab tree. That night, the cubs appeared again. Not alone. With them stood a lioness, young, cautious, new to the land. Asha watched from the porch. "They're building something here." Daniel nodded. He left them a place worth returning to. And so the farm continued, under new watch with new guardians. But every once in a while, Daniel would walk to the edge of the field and stand there for a while, watching the tall grass sway. Not waiting, not hoping. Just remembering. Because some stories don't end. They become part of the land, part of the silence, part of the reason no one ever asked again why that lion had come every night. Because now they knew.